right. Welcome to Life Change Transformation Season 2, Episode 19, which is really exciting because I can't believe we've been 19 episodes already in Season 2, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm joined here by Maeve Langford. She's all the way from Cork Island, Ireland. She's a change transformation coach. She just really truthfully does have this ability to lean into people and transform their lives and have them live their best selves. And it's so exciting to be here with her as always because she is an expert in this and really we work at this together. And when I say we do this together with you guys, it really is. We're going to talk a bit about today about some of our stuff that's going on. And then, our upcoming episodes as well, we're going to talk a bit about some of the things that bubble up because this is a process for us too. We're no different than you guys. We're just going through it and coming up with our own visions and our own obstacles that come in the way. And so that's, part of it. Today, we're going to talk about the Radical Wellbeing series is going to be continuing here today. It's going to be about mental well-being. And so we're going to get into some stuff here in a little bit. As always, my name is Gary Benoit. I'm now in Calgary, Alberta, not in Edmonton, Alberta anymore. I moved
Hmm.
locations, so I'm no longer in Edmonton, but still in the province of Alberta, all the way from Canada. So it's great to be here, Maeve, and we talk about mental well-being, the idea that we're mentally well. What does that truly mean, I guess, for you? Like, where does that sit in your mind in this moment? What does it feel like?
And I suppose it's one of those things that, like, the mind is always busy, right? There's just this yada, yada, yada that's going on all the time. And I think sometimes, we're maybe trying to make that stop or go away or try to deal with it, shut it down in some way. And I don't think that's really what we're trying to achieve when we're talking about well-being here, but it is about being able to in the great phrase, I think it was the man called James Allen, he said, we have dominion, right? We have dominion. And I have a lovely client who, when she came to her first vision workshop, she said, I never knew I didn't have to think the thoughts that I'm thinking. So what I see well-being as is when we can be in relationship with our own thinking, and when it's not serving us, we have the capacity to be able to say, I don't need to think like this. I don't need to think in this way. And that we can refocus our mind, refocus our attention on thought, but also on, we in our vision workshops we talk about, well, where does the thought come from in the first place? And it
Mhm.
comes from where you're putting your attention. So if I'm not liking what's happening in my mind, I get to interrupt that. I get to have dominion over that, and I can choose to put my attention on something that serves me better,
Mhm.
which will generate different types of thoughts.
Mhm.
And I think that's where well-being kind of comes. And I mean, there's a lot, right? We might get onto it a little bit about mood and food as well. In
Mhm.
radical well-being, I'm always talking about the interconnectivity
Mhm.
of all the different dimensions of well-being, and they're all interrelated, right?
Mhm.
We can't separate them out. So again, even when we think about mental well-being, it's also, well, what am I feeding my body in terms of how that's impacting how I'm thinking and feeling
That's
about
fair.
everything else.
I think
Yeah.
the mental well-being piece, I think it's become more of a conversation lately. I think it's been more in people's minds about the mental health and mental well-being. It's kind of out there. I think
Absolutely.
I believe too that it's a real, it's like your glue. I see it like glue. Like you physically, you can go and you can be working out all the time and you could be physically fit and you can have all that stuff going for you. But if you don't have that mental well-being, if you're not mentally well, it's hard to keep your body together because you can be working all the time, but ultimately
Yeah.
if that mental side of it isn't there. I love the piece that you talk about feeding your mind, right? What are you feeding your mind? What food are you giving your mind? And I think that comes back to a lot of some of the issues that I've noticed in some of the people that we talk to and we interact with is it's not just about your own thoughts, but like if you're always going to the constantly negative news or you're feeding off of that negativity, that's because let's be honest, when you look at social media and the stuff that's really creating a lot of momentum, it's technically, when I look at it, it's very negative stuff, and it's like
Yeah.
it's controversial stuff, and it's heavy because you can if you and especially if you take that on, now you're really creating that heaviness
Yeah.
in your mind, right? So your mental well-being starts to suffer as a result because your then worldview then starts to change,
Yeah.
right? And so if you're not reading and creating a different environment in your mind with the books you're reading or the articles that you're deciding to take in, and trying to figure that balance piece, right? It can
Yeah.
really cause some difficulties for you.
Absolutely. And I think there are two aspects to that. I think one of them is just the whole comparison despair, right? So we're looking at, yeah, and I often say this, that we're comparing our inside with other people's outside,
Hmm.
right? So,
Hmm.
we see some, they look all confident or all successful, or, that they have all the beautiful people around them, whatever it is. And we're looking at, our own inner landscape, which often is not the same as that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
we don't know what they're thinking or what they're really experiencing or what's really going on for them, but we're getting this projected outer image where it all looks great.
Hmm.
So I think that's one side of it, that comparison despair. And I think really like the simplest answer on that side of things is just to not go there. Right. And I know it's very compulsive. But again, like another client recently was saying that she did a digital detox for 30 days and she couldn't get over the difference it made
That's
in
fantastic.
particular to mental well-being,
Yeah,
right?
for
That
sure.
I mean, even just having a sense of time, and she said because she wasn't, spending all the time on social media, she was connecting with friends and family, and she was journaling, and it improved her relationship with herself as well as with other people around her. So I think this is when I say we have dominion, right? You and I, we get to decide, like, am I gonna open the social media? Am I going to spend time surfing the web or, am I going to just do something else? And we
Hmm.
actually do. Now, I'll acknowledge, right? The tech industry is paying billions to figure out ways to keep sucking us back,
For sure.
right?
For sure.
But we don't have to go there. And this is where it really is so important to
Hmm.
exercise our own choice.
Hmm. I think that's great. Yeah, it really is great. I think the the awareness piece, I think that's kind of a common theme in a lot of things that we do talk about. Like I think an awareness is, I think if you haven't realized it by now, having the awareness around what we're doing and how we're showing up, I think that's it comes back to that piece, because if you're not aware of it, it's really hard to change it, right? It's really hard
Yes,
to change
yes, for
that
sure.
behavior or that moment, right? So
Yeah,
you can't interrupt something that you're not aware of, right? So I think that
correct.
awareness is really, really important.
Yeah.
With my story, and I think back, and I'm just going to touch briefly on something that's pretty personal to me. But back in when I went through some critical incidents at work, and I was a police officer. I did 25 years doing that. So I ended up with an occupational stress injury or PTSD or whatever label you want to put on it. I wasn't diagnosed specifically because I never went to a doctor. I don't recommend that. That's not a recommendation by me. I'm not a medical professional. So if you're struggling, please reach out for help from the professionals that know all the little ins and outs. I didn't do that, didn't take that road. Um, it was a long journey for me back from that. But the reason why I bring it up is because it really was in my mind. Everything that I was experiencing, I created in my mind. I created this environment that I ended up becoming, and I was so focused on all the negative side of things. And so I was very angry. I was angry at the world. I was angry at, like, from my perspective, I was angry at the justice system. I was angry at the bad guys. I was angry at my department because they abandoned me, and I felt very abandoned by them in that moment.
Sure.
And then what that did was I had a lot of fear around widowing my wife and keeping, not being there for my son. And so, but ultimately, I was so focused and so attached to the fear that I was present at home, and I was disconnected, and I was driving that disconnection between her and I. And I was essentially doing exactly what was fearing I was doing,
You're being afraid of. Yeah.
I was present right there in the room, and I was still driving them away and widowing them in that way because I was just in that place. And then, so if you're in a place where you're not really sure what it's like, and you're feeling this anger, or you're feeling disconnected, and you have that, I would just invite you to be a little bit curious about how are you showing up in that moment, and what's different. For me, I had to become very aware of how I was showing up. And so that's what I did. I decided for something different.
Mm.
So I decided for a different relationship. I had an idea of what I wanted to have with my family. And I just leaned into that, and those opportunities started to come to me, right? There's things that came. And so I think it's really important too to see them as opportunities, not as things you should be doing, right? Like I had lots of opportunity to read different literature and be self reflective. And I had the choice, right, to read or not read. If I didn't read it, I would have been on the same path and it would have mattered. But I read those
Mm.
things and I became really keenly aware of how I was showing up. And I think after you're aware of that, there is ways to supplement your healing if you're feeling those things and you've experienced trauma or that kind of stuff. There's ways to supplement that stuff. So, um, because I think because it is a choice, I think, in that moment, how you decide for it. And there's a piece of it that, yes, there's a piece of it that's related to the clinical side of things where you have the trauma piece that you need to somehow figure out, right? There's a
Mm.
clinical side of that. And then there's also the mindset piece of, okay, I'm not going to let that control me. And I have that,
Yeah.
you said, what did you call it? You had providence. No, what did you call it? You have,
I'm
the,
not sure.
yeah, the ability to, it was a great word. Wish I would remember it now. How to rewind the tape and figure it out. But you have the ability to choose that path or choose that
Oh,
thought.
dominion. I was saying
Dominion.
we
You
have
have dominion.
dominion.
It's a great
Yes.
word. You have dominion in your
Yeah.
own mind, so you can control that part of it. So I think it's a twofold. Yes, it took me a longer time probably to get to where I needed to be without the actual treatments or the counseling or whatever that was. But it was a great healing journey for myself, and I think that the awareness and decision is really important, and then see opportunities that come your way because you can really overcome anything if you put your mind to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I believe so too. And I think, all of what you're saying is really further evidence to what we often say here is that, what you focus on expands, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm, but like, I mean, it was a great example, but sad, Gary, that like you're focusing on the tragedy, what happened and the fear of that, and that I'd widow my wife and, leave my son without a dad. And yet, by focusing on that so much and being so consumed by it, even though you were present, you were creating
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So what we focus on expands. And when you decide, no, I want to be a different type of husband, I want to be a different type of dad, I want to show up. And as you did that, then you saw the opportunities, right?
Hmm.
The books to
Hmm.
read, the people to talk to, the opportunities to show up slightly differently at
Hmm.
home. And then that changes everything. And I mean, none of this is a quick fix, right?
Hmm.
But hopefully it's sharing with all of you listening today that like there is a way out of this, right?
Hmm.
There is a way forward. And you mentioned the clinical side of things, right? There with mental ill health for sure. I was listening to a lady recently and she said about 30% of the time there really is a need for a kind of medical intervention and drugs and
Hmm.
medication and that's great. Actually, what she was talking about, and you and I didn't even touch on this in our prep for today, but she spoke about how having a spiritual connection and a sense of, that there is a bigger kind of presence in the world that helps us to make sense of all of this, that actually can enhance our mental well-being massively. And we know that sometimes people who have religion in their lives, but this isn't about religion, but maybe we've seen it when people have prayer, where they have a faith, that it does help them to cope with
Hmm.
things that, people who don't have that feel they miss it sometimes. So, but I'm not advocating any particular faith practice for any of us. What I would say, again, to support our mental well-being, having a belief in a higher power, having a faith system that, there is, whether it's the universe has got your back or whether it's God or,
Hmm.
you know, whatever you conceive of as God has your back. Those things I don't think they're significant to the holder of them, but they're not, any individual one of them isn't the answer. It's having a faith in something is what helps in a huge way, in a
Right.
huge way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just wanted to speak while we're kind of on this part of the topic as well about, when we're looking in the news and there is so much happening internationally at the moment, and
Mm.
whether that's in the States or the Ukraine or in Israel and Gaza, like it's and all the places that aren't making the headlines, but frankly are probably equally as challenging. Um, it can be so easy to just despair of all of it and, throw our hands up or just, kind of feel overwhelmed. And again, and I mean, I feel that too at times, but really for all of us today on the call and listening, to just really think about, the best way that, and I really believe this to be true, the best way we can make a difference to the planet is to heal ourselves
Absolutely.
and to do our own inner work. And whether that's managing, our mental well-being or spiritual well-being, or, how we show up in the workplace, or how we parent, or, how we are as children of our parents, or, whatever it is, to be the best we can be in that space. And where we're distressed about things that are happening internationally, to, well, what can I do? What can I do? And sometimes it can be practically and related in terms of, sending, I don't know, to a related charity, or, contributing in that way. Maybe it's writing to a member of parliament, or in Ireland it would be one of our TDs, and all of that is helpful.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's just like, when there's conflict in the world, like, where's there conflict in my life, right? Where's there
Right.
conflict in my head? Where's there conflict in my relationships?
Yeah.
Heal them,
Yeah.
heal them. And that will make a massive difference. If everybody was doing that, we wouldn't have global,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have global conflict.
And the thing is, like, spiritually, I think that's great. I think that's, I want to comment briefly on that, is that the spiritual side of things, the idea in faith, right? I went to gratitude, right? So that's what I was the first step. I think I've talked about that before, but like the gratitude practice was really, really key. And I think that has a big tie to faith, right? That faith in that
Yeah,
you're taking the steps and things are working out, and that faith and that spirituality and that and connecting with the spirit that's breathing me in that moment. There was true gratitude, right? I was grateful to be
yeah,
alive. I was grateful to have my family still. I was grateful to be able to rebuild my family. I could take the steps to do that stuff. So that stuff, and to be, and for the record, it's we have an amazing life. My wife and I are still together, and our son's amazing, and it's just fantastic. So we've grown over the last 10 or 12 years or so, somewhere there's about, maybe it's a little longer than that, but it's been like a great journey up to this point. And when you look at the world conflict and stuff, you know there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of noise.
there
There's a
is.
lot of noise out there in a lot of things, and we do have the choice, right, to to take it all on or to not, right? I think that's really important to understand that piece. But recently my wife and I, we did a bit of a tour through the United States, and there's a lot of people in Canada that were really didn't understand why we would be doing that, and how could we even go down there. And there's a lot of like, you're going to get stopped at the border, or they're going to detain you because you're Canadian, and a lot of this noise that they were rhetoric they were spewing from wherever they were getting their sources from. And Colette and I, of course, we live our life through our vision, and we do our best to do that. We don't do it perfectly. We just do our best to do it that way. And we made a decision. We made an intention to go down there and to just have amazing conversations with people, and to show up in the world as we would love to be talked to ourselves, right? And
Mhm.
right, and so we showed up in that way, and we had the most amazing and easy trip we've ever had into the US ever. And we were down there for about 3 weeks. And so to spend that time there and to have the conversations and meet amazing people and have great conversations with them and have that mutual love for each other as a human people, like, it was fantastic, because we got as much back as we gave out. Like, it was really
Sure.
fantastic, right? And so, like, I just think that oftentimes we wear that, and so then it becomes like this stress in our mind, right? And mentally we have this perceived threat or whatever, and because we perceive it, we believe it to be real in that moment. But truthfully, it's not that way. Just when you break it right down to, how am I showing up, right? Exactly what you said.
Yeah,
How do I take responsibility for me and my actions
yeah,
in that way? And so I think it's a great statement. And I think it's cool that way.
yeah. And I think that whole piece around, one of the ways to move through or move beyond overwhelm is to be more intentional, right? And I mean, every one of you listening today, like you've heard us say vision, 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 right? It's the starting point. So intention is like a mini vision, right?
Hmm.
And like when we can be intentional about what we want to create, it brings a lot of clarity, right? Because
Hmm.
I'm not worrying about the noise. I'm being clear about how I want to show up and the contributions I want to make and the experiences I want to have. And as we show up then more and more in alignment with that, we absolutely experience it and we create it.
Hmm.
And I mean, I have plans for the States in the fall, and there is a part of me that, I hear the news, and there's a part of me is like, and then there's another part of me is like, no, and I'm remembering your experience, and
Hmm.
I'm saying to myself, no, like, where am I going to put my attention? That,
Hmm.
the average person is a good person, right?
Hmm.
And I don't have to believe all the kind of scaremongering that's going on. And I also come back to, and this is maybe where faith comes in, right? Do bad things happen? Yes. I
Hmm.
think sometimes, Gary, I'm not sure those of you listening today would necessarily subscribe to this, but I think sometimes people can think, that when we're vision oriented and we believe in transformation and we believe in the power that people have, they can think it's a bit Pollyanna-ish, or that, that
Yeah.
we're just denying the harsh realities.
Yeah.
And it's not that. I
No.
mean, if I go to the States, could something bad happen? Maybe.
Sure.
Could I be detained? Maybe.
Sure.
But coming back to that, if that happens, I'll deal with it,
Hmm.
right? And my God and I will deal with
Hmm.
it. Spirit
Hmm.
and I will deal with it. And there'll have to be a way to deal with it.
Hmm.
And I know, and there's people in really dark places, right? And dealing with really negative stuff that I don't know how I would deal in those situations. But we know, and I often quote Nelson Mandela here, right? And people said, how did you get from being imprisoned for life in your country and then to go to lead that country, right? How does that happen? And actually, it was the mental peace within that he spoke to, or that I am aware
Hmm.
of that he
Hmm.
spoke to, where he said, I climbed the slope of thought.
Hmm.
And just going to taking dominion, and instead of like, this is the worst thing in the world and my life is over, to go to something like, well, what if
Hmm.
by virtue of me being imprisoned for life here, that's the start of things changing, that
Hmm.
this is the start of bringing attention to what's happening here.
Hmm.
And there was nothing inevitable about what he did, or how he did it, except that as I do that, as I climb that slope of thought, as I take dominion over my own thinking, I can absolutely create different outcomes.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
no doubt in my mind about that. And that's not to um, understate how challenging it is to do that, right?
Yes.
And you and I,
It's
we've both talked about having
yeah.
some tough times of late, and
Right.
and it's not easy, and this isn't panacea stuff.
No.
Like,
No.
it's
Like
there's
I
a rigor to it.
absolutely. There is like, and it's probably the toughest work that you'll ever undertake is the mental side of this work,
Yeah,
and the mental
yeah,
well-being piece, and to be in harmony with your mind, and to be at peace in your mind, and to have conviction in the direction that you're moving. It takes more than a little bit of effort, right? And
yeah,
you know, I'm a big believer that when every problem or that you're facing, or any kind of circumstance that's negative, like shows a negative, and it comes up as a problem or an issue, there's always a solution. And the
yeah.
solution may not always be visible to us because it operates on a different frequency than what we're seeing, right? And so the idea that you have to come at that problem from the energy of the solution, because they're two different levels, one's down here and one's up here. If you just know that you can get there through some of the stuff you just talked about, right? Nelson Mandela going through the slope of thought in his mind, and he climbs that slope in his mind. And the end result is, I mean, he didn't probably even couldn't even see the result at that point,
No,
right?
no, and he
He
didn't
was,
start
and
out
he didn't
thinking I'm
start
going to
out
be
thinking that,
president,
but he
right?
just really went to a different place, right? And so ultimately now it ended up with that. And so I think that's really kind of an interesting, it's a great analogy. And I think people can, if they just tap into that piece of it, to know that your mental well-being is tied to everything that you can do inside your body. It's your physical, it's the transformation, it's all of that stuff, right? So what mental well-being is truly the glue that holds it all together. And I said at the very beginning, because that is what it really truly comes down to, in my opinion.
And just, I mean, just if you're listening today, right, what does it mean, climb the slope of thought, right? It really means like finding a thought. So, I'm feeling depressed or I'm thinking really negative thoughts about what's happening in the world or what's happening in my life. And it's to say, well, what's a more empowering thought you could have in this moment? Like, well, there has to be good in this, or there has to be a silver lining, or, that maybe I'm learning something here
What can
about
I
what
learn
I'm
here? Yeah.
made of.
Hmm.
And as I do that, then like you said, that we shift frequency, and then we start to have other ideas on that
Hmm.
higher frequency, and then we go a little bit higher again. So it's not about going from down in the doldrums to like all happy clappy and isn't
Yep.
it wonderful? It's not but it's just like in the Nelson Mandela example, it was like, well, what if by virtue of me being here actually something good can come out of this?
Right.
And then he got from that higher vibration, he got the idea, well, you could write to journalists,
Hmm.
right? Write to people in America and bring attention to what's happening. And he got, I think it was like 1 or 2 letters a month was all he could send,
Hmm.
right? So making that choice, okay, well, at least one of these is going to go to a journalist. And for months, nothing happened. So again, it's not like suddenly everything is miraculously okay, but he's like, he's on it, he's doing the thing he can do, right? And he has this thought and he feels there's something in it. And he kept sending it. And then I think it was 2 Wall Street journalists started to take interest, and bit by bit things started to change and shift,
Yeah,
and it took many years before
for
he would
sure.
become a president, but that was the process, and it's
Hmm.
the same for you and I.
Hmm.
And I think within that slightly more empowering thought, maybe that can segue me into this idea of like we are probably our own harshest critics, right? I,
100%.
I, I say this to managers in the workplace
100%.
all the time. And they're like, how am I going to give the negative feedback in a performance review conversation? And I'm like, don't worry about it, because like the person sitting opposite you is most likely way more critical of their own performance than you are, right?
Yeah.
So that I mean, it's good to be self-reflective, right? We talk about reflection all the time, but this kind of reflection about and making ourselves wrong and making ourselves bad and beating ourselves up that we're not better, and that comparison despair thing, that I'm not as good as other people, like that, just like we just have to let go of that.
Hmm.
We just have to, and again, really rigorous to do that and to make that decision. But really, for all of us, and myself no less, and I'm sure you too, right, to just decide to be more of a best friend to
Hmm.
ourselves. We would never speak to our kids or our friends or our siblings in the way we often speak to ourselves, and
No.
to just stop letting that be okay, right?
Yeah.
And just say, no, I'm not willing to do that to myself, because that we're doing that to ourselves,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
again, we can stop that.
Yeah.
We
And that
can
comes back to
stop
that
that.
awareness too, right? If you're aware of how you're speaking to yourself, if you're aware of what you're saying, and in those moments of really hard moments, the words, the I am statement, right? The I am, and then you fill in the blank.
Yeah,
It Your mind doesn't know the difference between reality or not. So if you feel like, well, I'm really stupid, or I'm not good at math, or I'm not a very good husband, then ultimately it becomes your reality. You believe it because that's just what you've told yourself that you are, right? It's your sacred name, I am, right? And so ultimately, if you believe that I am a great husband, and I am worthy of an amazing family, and I am going to have an amazing life, then you can create that. And regardless of what you're seeing as evidence around you in the moment, it doesn't
yeah,
matter, right? And so it's just about really taking hold of that statement and saying, no, I am great at
yeah,
this, or I'm really
yeah,
right. And so, and that comes back to the awareness of how we're thinking, how we're talking. And as we think about the mental well-being, and as we come kind of, as we start to conclude this episode, what do you think? You have a card, right? You have a specific card in the deck. right?
And there's several on mental
Okay.
well-being.
But
Yeah.
there's one
Oh,
you
but there's
pointed
one, I know the
there's
one you're
one you
thinking
pointed
of.
out. Yeah.
Yes, so there's one that says follow your path of delight. And
Yeah.
it's not specifically in the mental well-being section, just to confuse people. It's actually under the pleasure principle, right? So we did a separate episode on the
Hmm.
principles for radical well-being, and one of them is pleasure. How can I bring more joy into my well-being practices? And it's this great phrase that says follow your path of delight.
Hmm.
And I have this idea in me anyway, and hopefully it resonates with any of you listening today, but that I think a lot of our mental stress comes from putting pressure on ourselves that we should do things in a certain way, that there's a right way and a wrong way, and that the experts say that this is, I must walk 10,000 steps. Well, what if like 2,000 steps was bringing you joy? Let that be an I would say, right? Let that be enough, and find other things that bring you joy, and don't be beating yourself up about steps that frankly, if you're not enjoying, you're not going to get to 10,000 steps anyway. So do the 2,000 or the 3,000 or whatever it is, or don't do steps, but dance around the kitchen, or join a class of something that you like, or start to swim, or whatever it is. I mean, movement, yes, our bodies are designed for movement. And all the evidence is, and again, you'll see loads of statistics around just getting out for a walk will really serve your mental
Hmm.
well-being. So I mean, I subscribe to all of that. But if it just isn't your thing to do something that, eat more protein or whatever it is, and it's just not doing it for you, there has to be another way, because
Hmm.
there's no one way
Hmm.
to mental health, to physical health, to success, whatever you want to think of as your end goal. There's just not a single way to get there.
Correct.
So find the thing that gives you joy. And I
Hmm.
know for me, one of those things is swimming, right? And I mentioned a while back, I hadn't been swimming a whole lot over the winter. It's very cold, right? And
Hmm.
the local pool was closed, and again, excuses maybe, but I hadn't been swimming. And finally, about a month or 5 weeks back, I said to my husband, I just need to get in water. And the nearest place to get in water was the local river, right? And we went down to the river. I didn't get into it for very long, but I got into the river and I got out. And Andrew said to me, every time you get out of water, you just have this big smile on your
Hmm.
face. He said, like, you really have to keep doing this. So I'm back now at least 3 times a week. I'm
It's
swimming
fantastic.
and I'm in water, and I love it.
Hmm.
Right. So again, everybody's going to have their own version of that, right? But find it, whatever it is, and allow yourself to lean in, because when you have joy going on in your life, you will definitely feel
Yeah.
physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually better.
Yeah.
No
Absolutely.
doubt.
Yeah. For
No
sure.
doubt.
For sure. I think
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Like delight, the word delight, when you think about that word, it's such a great word. Because
Yeah.
you can just visualize what that looks like. You can see it on kids' faces when they're having those moments and they're
Yeah.
laughing, and you can see it on people, and you can just have that visualization in your mind. And it already just that word just kind of lights people up. It lights me up.
Yeah.
What mental well-being is, it's a very I have a great passion for mental well-being, mental health. I think that is really, it's always because it's my path that I walked for the last 15 years to get to where I am today. And um, I believe there's no better cure for your mind than you. I think,
Yeah.
I think you hold the key. So when you're listening today, it doesn't matter what you're experiencing or where you're at, but you hold the key to your own well-being inside of your own mind, in my opinion.
Mm.
Go to gratitude, use a gratitude journal if you need to start that faith piece, and then just become highly aware of what you're saying to yourself, how you're showing up in that moment.
Yeah.
Because in as soon as you become aware of it, you can start to change it, and you have to make a decision to change it. And I think if you just lean on some of the tools that we talked about today and some of the principles that Maeve just mentioned, like that, follow your path of delight, that is the best wrap up for any of our episodes, in my opinion, because it really means a lot. And I think if you really consider it, really consider what those words mean for you, it could change the trajectory of your life, essentially. Like take that path that really lights you up, that you feel just at peace and joy all in the same place. And so I have no more words than that. Thank you for the insights today. It's been fantastic as always. You're a superstar when it comes to this stuff. I love it. Our next episode is going to be on some of the summer solstice stuff and some of the energy around what that looks like.
Yeah.
So please join us for that in a couple of weeks. And is there anything upcoming for you want to highlight before we finish?
Well, actually, probably by the time this is aired, we'll be just about to start. I do a little mini coaching course on radical well-being. So, I mean, the card deck is available for all of you listeners. And
Hmm.
if you'd love to join me for a 5 week course, we take a week on each of those domains, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and then we do a final kind of wrap-up call and I share a tool for always knowing what's your next step to
There you go.
take. And that's a real chance to connect as the community who've done the program together. So yeah, we put all those links into
Okay.
the details below the call, and I'd love, and it's in the evening in Ireland, so even in Canada, you guys could join
Yeah.
in if you wanted to.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. And that's what we have. Of course, Amazon.com or CA has my book. And so call the call for service. So if anybody wants to reach out and read that book a little bit, please, I welcome you to take a read and throw me some feedback if you liked it or if you have some thoughts about it, that'd be fantastic. And so we will see you guys all next time. Thank you very much for joining in. Without you guys, we don't have a show. So thank you very much for being here and continue to listen. And have yourself a great couple weeks. We'll see you in two.
Thanks.